Hi there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud-Based Mayhem. Those of you who are paying attention to the airwaves have heard about some of, but probably not all, of the carnage lately in beer. It has been an exceptionally rowdy season for Carnage out there. There always is a ton. And it's, I think, mostly a numbers game, but also big terrain. You're in the Himalayas. Things get big quick. And many of you, I'm sure, heard the news about my guest today, Ben Lewis, Canadian pilot from the Yukon, who got sucked up in cloudsuck and had a number of injuries, passed out, went above 7,400 meters. That's over 24,000 feet. And incredibly came down at an unbelievable descent rate. Whether his glider was all iced up or in a rope or what, we don't really know because he was unconscious. But landed in the trees and made it home. This is his story. It is absolutely unbelievable. I've heard a lot of crazy and wild stories being around this game and this sport for so long, but this one might take the cake. So you're in for a treat, and it all ends pretty well. But before we get to it, I wanted to make some offhand comments about what I think about is going on out in beer. I'm not there. I have been there twice. I was there in 2009 and 2011, and there was a lot of carnage back then. And it's become an incredibly popular place to go for people from around the world. It has amazing conditions nearly every day this time of year, and a lot of big flights go down there in the spring and in the fall every year. And so it's definitely on the map, but I think the approach for many people going there is wrong. And what I mean by that is I think there's this real sense of safety and security flying there because there isn't a lot of wind. You learn there pretty quickly that you can dive into places that you never would in the Rockies or the Alps. You know, there's not a lot of lee typically, but it is huge terrain. It is, once you go back a little ways, although you'll hear in this story, you don't have to go back. It can happen on the Front Range too. But, you know, you get into areas that require either impossible walkouts in a helicopter or very long walkouts, or if you're hurt, very slow and very challenging retrieves. Apparently this year, in fact, sounds like, unfortunately, there was a fatality just this morning over there. But the day of this accident, when Ben goes nuclear and goes up over 24,000 feet, I think there were 8 other accidents that day. A whole bunch of reserves. There's been a ton of reserves every day. There's been a lot of mid-airs. And because I work so closely with Global Rescue, I'm often getting the call on, hey, can you help out with this? Or, you know, why did they not get a helicopter for us? Or why are they not helping out with the claim? We as a community need to be a lot more thoughtful about how we're using rescue. You know, we shouldn't be using rescue or heli rescue for being stupid. What I mean by that is, you know, you get hypoxic, you don't have the gear that you need, you land out really deep, and you've put yourself in a tough spot. That's not a place for a heli rescue. A heli rescue is for accidents, but too many of those are happening as well. And if we keep stacking up the accidents, then people or companies like Global Rescue are just going to exclude paragliding, and that's it. They're one of the last companies out there that provides coverage for extreme sports, hang gliding, paragliding, base jumping, that kind of thing. And we want to keep that coverage going, but it's not going to if, you know, they're getting calls constantly from paragliding. They pay attention to the numbers, and it's all just the bottom line. That's how insurance companies work. We could help that a lot, but also just help our families and our friends and other pilots by going to places like beer and putting a lot more margin into your calculations. So that's, you know, having emergency gear, that's having an inReach and understanding how to use it. But in places like beer in India, they don't allow satellite trackers. So A, you'd have to sneak it in to use it. And B, if you go down and have an accident, it's not like it is in most parts of the world where you can just call a helicopter and deal with the claim on the backside. Helicopters in beer and in many places in the world aren't going to come get you unless you pay up front. That's quite hard to do when you're on the ground and you're hurt. And so these kind of things have to be factored in. Ben tells a story in the show about a pilot who was in a relatively easy place to get rescued, had a broken back, and laid there for 3 days before the helicopter came and got him because they couldn't get the helicopter paid. And it took them that long for the insurance company to pay the helicopter. This, in my mind, is not a shortcoming of these companies. That's just how it works. They have, when you go down hard, you have to let the insurance company know in advance that what's happened, and it's got to go through a whole chain of command. And that often is way too long. And so we just have to get the helicopter coming and deal with that on the back end, and hopefully they cover it. But it doesn't always work out that way. And so, I think going to a place like beer, you have to go in knowing that there's going to be a whole lot of shortcomings. And if you go down, you've put yourself in a really serious situation. So, maybe we got to start thinking as a community of, flying less hot gliders, having a ton more margin, carrying a lot more stuff. And as you'll hear in this one, flying at times where, it's safer. In this case, a lot of pilots were lulled into a false sense of security because of previous days. Big clouds and cumulonimbus just dissipated. It went away. And so that becomes your mental model for the future. And that's a terrible mental model. We can't predict on Tuesday because of what happened on Monday, even though it looks exactly the same. There's different energy and there's different, all kinds of things in our atmosphere that could change from day to day. And we've got to create mental models that are going to allow us to fly the next day. So my point here is that there's too much carnage going on here in beer. If it keeps happening, we're going to not have any company cover us. And this is on our community to change. I think it's really important that we do. And our families and friends will thank us for it. Next thing I wanted to talk about, and this is actually related to this, although it wasn't planned to be, but flying in rain. I had a listener reach out a couple weeks ago, sent an email, who was flying in rain. Wasn't that hard. Wing went parachutal when he went to land, and he's really, really banged up. And just wanted me to comment on it. And I think many of you heard the story about my flying in very light rain situation in the first day of the X Alps when I was doing the journalism thing over there in the race last summer, flying out towards Wagrain. And I was flying a brand new wing. It literally had 0 minutes on it until that day. And I understand that Ozone's put out information about this on their website, but especially when wings are new, the fabric allows raindrops to stay on the surface, that it doesn't kind of soak into the fabric. And this makes it very easy when you don't need a lot to lose the flow of the wing. It breaks the surface with the air, and a wing can go parachutal in very, very light rain these days with the fabrics they're using, especially when they're new, when the porosity is really good. So something to just keep in mind. If you're flying in rain, obviously we all know we shouldn't be flying in rain, but if you're even in light rain, you need to immediately give yourself as much margin as possible and stay on bar. Do not, under any circumstances, go use big ears, because that just makes less surface area for the wing. It's more easy for the wing to go parachutal. But if you can Google it, Kriegel does some really good videos on what to do when you're flying in rain. And basically the trick there is to hammer your speed bar, and you do not get off the speed bar until you're safe on the ground. So if you're coming in and you're 20 feet off the ground, in fact, one of the bad accidents in beer was exactly this. A pilot was maybe on speed bar, but coming into land, came off the speed bar when the wing was pretty wet and just instantly went parachutal and pounded hard. So got to stay on the speed bar to the ground. Ideally, don't fly in rain, period. But of course, it does happen from time to time. But I know from personal experience, from my X-Alps experience last year, I had flown in much, much heavier rain than that, especially in that race and previous editions. And it really caught me by surprise. And I was quite low over trees and had to hit my speed bar twice first time to just get out of it. And then I was, I moved away from the terrain and I was making a very slow little turn, tiny bit of brake, and did the same thing again. So just be wary of that, especially with a new wing, that they go parachutal real easy. So if you're low, it could be bad. Let's get on to the show. This is an incredible story. Sit back, relax. You will not believe it. Pretty wild. Story of Ben Lewis going really tall and things getting crazy out in beer just a week ago. Cheers. Ben, welcome to the mayhem. I wish we were connecting because of some other incident, but I think most of the world knows about your cloudsuck incident in beer. Cross Country Magazine put out a really good little rehash of it, and I actually read your comments on X Contest because somebody over there emailed a couple days after your incident and said he's never seen so much carnage. There's been a ton of incidents, and a few of them I've actually been involved with global rescue and helicopters and all that kind of thing. It sounds like beer is getting a lot of traffic this year, and many things have gone down, but maybe yours tops the cream of the exceptionally wow factor. And so let's before we get into the cloudsuck and going super tall and passing out and everything, I want to hear, everybody wants to hear all about that, but let's briefly just touch on your background. How long you been flying? Where do you live? How old are you? All that kind of stuff. Give us your quick flying resume.
Yeah. Hey, Gavin. Thanks for having me on the show. So I'm 45. I'm a family doctor up in the Yukon, which is Northwest Canada. I've been flying a long time. I took a one-day course in New Zealand back in 2009, and then my buddy and I split a glider. And we just kind of took off a mountain in the Yukon, and made some mistakes there, and flew kind of rarely for the next decade, until sort of upgrading my gear, and then kind of getting more serious about 3 years ago with some tours in Colombia and sort of more flying in Mexico. Still pretty low airtime. I kind of was around, I think, 100 hours heading to beer. I think that probably shows a little.
My first trip to beer was 2009, and I think that was the first place I ever did 100K. I was somewhere maybe around that. Maybe I was 200 hours or something. But yeah, I mean, it's big terrain for low hour pilots, but it seems to attract many of them. Did you find it intimidating, or were you digging it?
There's, like you said, there's tons of carnage. Like, we're on the WhatsApp, search and rescue chat group, and every day there's all sorts of carnage. I think there's sadly a fatality like earlier today even, right? Like, it's crazy. Everyone's
Really?
tossing reserves and crashing and mid-air collisions, and people getting lost in the back mountains. So that part was intimidating, and but the flying itself, and I certainly had every day we were having our personal bests. I went to beer with a few other buddies, and it was great. You just fly these long flights for the first time, break 100 kilometers, and then break 170, and then go kind of further and further. And that was probably part of my problem, was trying to go for a 200 kilometer flight and sort of pushing the boundaries a bit.
The gentleman who emailed me about your incident, which I'd already heard about, but also these others, I think the day that you had yours, there were something like 9 reserves or maybe 9 accidents. I can't remember what it was, but what do you chalk up all the carnage to? What's going on out there? Because there always is, and I think it's a numbers thing. I mean, it used to be that the it sounds bad, but the Russian contingent was always a big part of it because you had these pilots coming out that literally had 10 hours that were flying CCC wings. There was this huge disconnect between experience and where people were flying. That was part of it, especially with the Russians back in the day. I don't know if that's still the case, but a lot of it's just, you can be on beer. I mean, even back in, when I was there in 2009 and then 2011, and, there'll be 250 people on launch in the Himalayas. So I think a lot of it's just numbers. You see the same kind of thing in Ansy, but the carnage has been extreme this year. And what do you chalk it up as? Is it just too many people like Ben Lewis, not enough hours, or is it what is it?
Yeah, I think the numbers, like the house thermals are crazy busy, and there's definitely mid-air collisions every few days for sure, which, unfortunately I
Wow.
think was the cause of the fatality earlier today. Um,
Okay.
but yeah, I was lulled into a false sense of security with all these like huge threatening looking clouds actually like being super benign, and you can kind of skim underneath them and no real consequences for a couple of weeks solid, and then suddenly a storm appeared, basically our first real thunderstorm, and I just wasn't expecting it, and I wasn't ready for it. So I mean that's why kind of caught me out there. Why are everyone else kind of crashing and throwing reserves? Yeah, I think that's probably it. I think a lot of just sort of inexperienced mountain flyers, but there's also experienced pilots going down, and
Hmm.
yeah, there's a lot of advanced wings in the trees and people hiking down or relaunching, and yeah, I'm not sure
I
exactly.
wonder. I wonder if it's. I had this experience that people who listen to the show regularly have heard this. I won't get into it too deeply, but I had this experience in Annecy when I was a very newbie pilot, I don't know, 15 years ago or so, where one day we went flying and it was mostly perfect. There was this big cell growing over actually the north of the lake, north side of the lake, kind of towards Geneva, and it went so big that I was just amazed that there were people in the air. So my little group, we landed, and then this thing just dissipated and it went away. And so it made us look kind of dumb. And there were, still hundreds of pilots in the air, and at all levels. There were, you know, really advanced pilots, and there was just a ton of people flying around on ENAs and tandem pilots, and, just a typical Annecy day. And so the next day it was picture the same. It was exactly the same cell, the same time of day, the same amount of sun, the same kind of energy in the sky. And so, we stupidly went, well, that one went away yesterday. It'll do the same. And it didn't. And it went nuclear, and the gust front was vicious, and people were raining down on into the trees and bouncing off roofs, and there were a lot of accidents. People landed in the lake that day. It was just proper chaos. And I was pretty new, but it really opened my eyes to how much we can't really we really got to be careful when it comes to big stuff, because it can just, like you said, it can dissipate or it can go massive. It sounds like that's kind of what caught you out.
Yeah, definitely. Like my buddies and I were all talking about the big clouds, and we're all like, "Oh, they look pretty dark and scary," and we're like, "Yeah, they do," but everyone's still flying, and tandems are still going, and everyone seems
So there's a
fine.
real lemming effect going on there.
Yeah, and so we just got used to these huge cumulus clouds, and like not really having you know, a much cloud suck, and just being fine to fly underneath them, and yeah, um,
Is there much, when I was there, I don't remember even ever looking at the weather. It's this crazy place where you just look at the sky and you go, but that might have been because it's 2009, 2011. We've got way better models these days. Are you all paying a lot of attention to weather models and CAPE and things that would have potentially predicted that this day was different?
I would just check windy actually, and I was looking at windy for a few days, and I think it seems to be just kind of not very accurate at all for beer area. It was
Okay.
predicting like a better day than the previous days, and it was going to be worse the next few days. And so I was thinking this was probably like the last good XC day. for a while, and I should go for a longer flight if I can. And I was basically predicting the same as it had been, but less cloud cover and less activity, and it was just entirely wrong.
So you're from the Yukon, Northwest Yukon, Northwest Territories, and that not very familiar with that terrain. I've flown quite a bit in Alaska, and I've been a bunch up in the Coast Range in BC and stuff around Terrace. But you mentioned that you've been going down to Colombia lately and getting kind of more serious about XC since 2019. What's your mountain experience? How much time have you spent in places like the Alps or places like Beer with just big terrain?
I think Beer is the biggest mountain flying I've ever done for sure. We do have mountains in the Yukon up here in Northwest Canada. They're sort of isolated, and you kind of fly from one mountain to the next, but it's not like a huge mountain range, and they certainly don't extend thousands of meters into the sky. So I had very limited, in terms of kind of proper, tall mountain flying.
Okay. I watched your track log, and like I said, I think most people listening to the show have probably read the report in Cross Country, the article that they put up, if not your comments, which had your comments on your X contest, which I appreciate very much that you put out there. Often when things like this happen, pilots are embarrassed or ashamed or, nervous of putting it out there in the public sphere. And I think it's really valuable that people do. And thank you for doing it. It sounded just unbelievably terrifying. I think most people listening have probably spent a little bit of time in a white room one time or another. And of course we know we shouldn't fly in rain, and we shouldn't get cloud sucked, but these things do happen. And it's terrifying being in a cloud and just not knowing up from down and left and right. But you are in something just way more violent than I think most people thankfully ever experience. But take us through that day. You flew from Beer. Looked like you made it out Dharamsala. I didn't zoom in. I don't know if you went past Dharamsala or how far out, but yeah, just rerun that day a little bit.
Yeah, sure. And it was certainly embarrassing to post it. Like, I'm not proud of obviously making these rookie mistakes and ending up almost dying. But I felt it was important to do, and basically there certainly was a story there. So, the weather predicted a reasonable cross country day, and so I took off fairly early. And the house thermal was just clogged with gliders. It's super busy. So I basically exited as soon as I could, and then, scrounged for lift heading west towards Dharamsala. And I was kind of hoping, I'd already flown like a 170 and was kind of hoping to break 200 kilometers. I only had a few days left in Beer. And the best way to do that is to fly past Dharamsala. So I'm not sure how far past that I flew, like, I don't know, 15, 18 kilometers, something like that. Which was, I was kind of late in the day as well, because I didn't get a ton of height initially. So if you get lots of height in the house thermal, you can basically glide a third of the way there, and that didn't happen. It was kind of a hard to get lift fighting day, initially anyway. And so I flew quite a bit past Dharamsala, and the cloud cover was forming, so the cloud base was dropping, and so I made my way back to familiar territory fine. I was keeping free of clouds. I was able to sort of skim along the bottoms. Yeah, and then I was back in familiar territory. I'd been, in that location several times, so I had these GPS track logs I could follow. Yeah, it was getting kind of harder and harder to stay down out of clouds. Like, full speed bar was working initially, and then full speed bar in big ears, and then I was in a cloud, and I just
sort of. Where were you flying?
I was flying Alpina 4.
And did you have a pretty good sky? Was this kind of embedded QNIMs, or did you have a pretty good view of how vertical things were getting?
No, not at all. It was basically this overcast layered at like probably 8,000 initially, and then it was dropping to 7,200 feet.
Okay.
And so I had very poor visibility into the distance. Even if I was free of clouds, I couldn't really see anything building in the further east of me.
Okay. Are you all on? Are you on radios? How are you communicating with your buddies?
Yeah, I was on solo that day. Like my buddies were kind of hanging around the launch area. I think one had sort of ventured west a bit, and actually was caught in the storm as well. He got kind of rained on and had to ditch out. And yeah, we were on radios, but I was pretty far out, and I probably need a better radio because I really had no communication with my buddies at all.
So at this point, there's no there, and you all aren't sharing a frequency with most people flying at beer. You were just on your own, freak.
Yeah, I mean, I have a dual band radio, and I had the emergency frequency on the second band, but no.
So was anybody on that going, hey, it's getting really big, or were there any warnings via text or otherwise?
I would hear bursts of language. It often wasn't in English, though, so I really wasn't sure what was going on.
Okay.
Gotcha. Yeah, and there was kind of nothing from my friends. I wasn't trying to reach them. I was, for a while, I thought things were fine, and I was, even when I kind of got sucked up into cloud, and then speed bar and big ears wasn't really working, I was still able to follow my GPS track, and even though I was still climbing, I kind of thought things were going to be okay. I thought I was going to fly through the area of lift. I thought I was going to come out on the other side of this cloud. And I just kind of kept waiting for that to happen. And I was sort of leery of kind of flying off into the valley because I hadn't been there, that far south before. I didn't really know that area, even though it, replaying it in my head, I should have just flown south,
just taking a right turn and flown south.
Absolutely. Yeah. The first sign of this just kind of unrelenting lift. And I kind of expected to fly through it. I'm not, it's silly for sure in retrospect. And then
and what's your Vario doing early stages? Are you in a 3 up, a 5 up? I mean, is it just zinging, or was it, okay, this is probably going to be manageable?
Yeah, no, early, it was kind of a gradual sort of lulled me into, it was sort of like +1, +2. This is with full speed bar and big ears at times, still going up. But I thought, it didn't seem too alarming at first. Then a couple minutes into cloud flying, I'm following my GPS track. I basically can't get down. I thought about, flying back the way I came, but that didn't make a lot of sense to me at the time because I just flew through this area of lift. And so why would I, turn around and fly back through that area of lift? At that point, I certainly should have headed south much, much earlier. But,
And so anyway, at this point, are you doing anything stronger evasively? Are you spiraling, or you're still just basically trying to fly straight? Is it hard to fly straight in cloud?
I was just trying to fly straight to get out of the area of lift was what I was thinking. And then then it started to rain on me, which, turned to sleet and hail quickly. And then I tried to head south then. And at that point, I couldn't even maintain big ears. It was just too strong. And then I couldn't even maintain speed bar. Just got very, very rough, and my GPS cut out, and I had a magnetic compass that was just spinning back and forth, and I really tried to maintain a south heading, but at that point, the Vario started screaming, and I just basically lost control of the glider, and it's just, incredibly strong and violent, and just up, up, up. And it was just amazingly chaotic in the cloud. It was dark and noisy.
Is it lightning?
There's thunderclaps, and I think I looped the glider at one point, and just it was my lines were twisted on and off. I untwisted, but it was just crazy. I was amazed that the glider was still flying. It was just so violent. I remember when I looped, I was sort of hoping I was going to get gift wraps so that I could fall out of the cloud and then throw my reserve. But I was thinking about all sorts of options. I'm do I toss my reserve? That's not going to help. It's just going to tear my harness apart. My hands were quite frozen at this point. I was already up, several thousand feet. And I was thinking of using my hook knife to cut my lines, but, you'd be cutting one line at a time or something. It would be, disastrous for a period of time. I wasn't really sure what to do. I mean, it was too late. I realized I had already made all the poor decisions to get into this situation. And it was just so violent. And, I just felt sad and just had regrets. And
was there, it sounded like, when you got to this point of just, wow, I'm going to die, and kind of resign to it, was that on the backside of just pure panic for a long time? I mean, you think your brain was just, uh, I, when I've been in cloud and that, not that kind of situation, but when I've been in cloud, there's this period of holy shit, I can't do anything. And it's very scary.
Yeah, surprisingly there wasn't a lot of panic. It was kind of a
Okay.
gradual transition to this like state of helplessness, and I just realized there was absolutely nothing I could do. I mean, honestly, it didn't matter if I had my hands on the brakes or not. Like, I had no control of my glider. There was really nothing I could
Wow.
do, and so I just yeah, for some reason I'm sure I was in some sort of spiral because just the G forces kind of like, you know, with my head out, right, and all the blood rushing to my head, and it was just so hard to sit forward. I realize now I should have tried harder to like sit forward in my harness. That would have spared me a lot of the kind of the negative injuries that I received, like the retinal hemorrhages and stuff. I probably wouldn't have blacked out too, so I would have been able to throw my reserve, after coming out the top. But
Okay, so well, pause here for a second.
Sure.
And for those who haven't read, what injuries are you talking about? Because I read about the retinal thing, but you were also pretty beat up. Was that from the flying, or was that from the landing in the trees?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it was the flying in the harness. Like, I've got a couple broken ribs on the right side, and I'm pretty sure that was just the harness. I broke my neck pretty good. I had unstable fractures of C4, C5, which I actually found out several days later. And that could have been really just from the flying, honestly. Like, it was probably a
that violent
hyperextension injury. And yeah.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it was just, yeah. I mean, I think my friend had, like, looking at my track log, had commented at one point it was 23 meters per second up. And it just, it just felt impossibly powerful to do anything about. Yeah.
What speed is that? That's over 60K an hour, isn't it? What are you going up at there? 70K an hour. So, holy cow, that's incredible. The only time I've ever heard of anything even close to that was the super final down in Colombia. Kriegel and Yasin and a bunch of people in the lead gaggle went into a fire on purpose. It had been clouded out and shaded out for a long time. And, from flying Colombia, they they burn those fields, the sugarcane fields. And, the pyrocumulus in this thing was a couple thousand feet over cloud base. This thing was a ripping fire. It wasn't one of these gentle fires. It was booming. And, Kriegel went into this thing a couple thousand feet off the ground and, had to full stall or macro stall 3 times just to gain control of the glider. But he was going up at 20 meters a second. This is the only time I've ever heard somebody go, Yasin ended up having to throw his reserve because he got so many twists in his glider. It was a rope. That's a really violent climb, 23 meters. I've never heard of that. That's crazy.
Wow, it's impressive he could maintain control, at 20 meters per second. That's awesome.
People that saw it, my friend and neighbor, Matt Beechner, was right behind him, planning on doing the same thing. And he saw him go in there and explode 3 times and went, yep, no, I'm not going in there. I mean, it was one of these just black thermals, with stuff on fire in it. It was ludicrously dangerous maneuver, but apparently he had to stall 3 times just to hold on to the thing.
Yeah, and I probably should have tried something like, full stalls and stuff. I just, yeah.
Well, I mean, interesting. So I've asked about this. Several years ago, I was contemplating what happens if you get sucked up in a cloud, and what about just full stalling out of it? And turns out it's not nearly fast enough of a descent to do anything. So it's just basically putting your wing in a more unstable state than you already were. So in other words, it wouldn't do very much. The initial stall, you'd maybe fall a little bit, and then you're still just a hoover. You're still just going to go up. So that's what people who know more than I do have said anyway. But you're not coming down that fast in a full stall, in a deep stall configuration, because there's so much fabric still over your head.
Yeah, and that's what it felt like. It felt like there was nothing I could do to stop the ascent. It was just up for sure. Yeah.
Did you have a drogue by any chance?
No, I don't.
Yeah. Not that your hands were frozen. Not that would have done much either. But you said you felt like you were and I haven't looked that closely at your track log, but you said you felt like you were in a really strong spiral for a bit. Did you have was your wing open? Did you have a big cravat, or was that just, or was that something you were trying to do?
No, it wasn't purposeful. I think my lines were probably mostly twisted at that point anyway. And no, the wing seemed like it was mostly open, like it was collapsing all the time and then reopening and jumping around everywhere. But just to be able to not have me sit up in my harness, it was just a lot of negative G's. Like it must have come from a spiral of some kind.
Okay.
Yeah.
God, you know what would be fascinating is take a look at your lines. It'd be fascinating to measure your wing now at this stage and see how much it's stretched. And I mean, because to get soaked and then all those G forces, it'd be interesting to look at those numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I paid somebody to retrieve the wing from the forest. I didn't want to litter, obviously, in the jungle. And so, and then I chatted with a local guide, and he thought it was actually repairable. Like the leading edge was pretty trashed, actually. There's lots of rips and tears all along the underside of the leading edge. But no, he said I should bring it to the local kind of fixer guru. And yeah, so I left it with my friend in Beer, and he brought it to him, and he's actually, I think, fixing it up right now. And so he's going to remeasure all the lines, and we'll see what comes of it.
Wow, interesting. Okay, well, back to the episode. So you're getting slaughtered, and then I understand at one point you pass out.
Yeah, I remember seeing 22,000 feet on my Vario, and then it like kind of iced over, and I couldn't see anything else. And I had to actually take my goggles off. I had to slip them down because they were just ice. I couldn't see a thing. Not that it actually mattered. It didn't matter to see. I should have left my goggles on. It would have saved me some injury there. Yeah, and so it was just up, and then basically
the injury to your eyes was from the cold.
Yeah, I had a corneal injury on my left eye, which is either from frostbite or maybe from hail. Like there was lots of like ice flying around in the storm, and so it could have been either of those things. I mean, it could have been foliage on the way down too, I suppose. Yeah, but that was pretty minor, and I thought that was the reason for my loss of vision in that eye, but it was actually like bleeding in the back of the eye.
Oh God!
But we can get to the injuries, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I basically just hung there, and I just thought of my family, and it was just so sad that I was leaving them, and yeah, I have two small kids, and just yeah.
How old are your kids?
1 and 3.
Oh, really young.
Yeah.
How much does your background in medicine? How much was that in your head? Were you thinking things that probably people that aren't doctors aren't thinking in that kind of situation?
Probably when I came to, I kind of, was trying to figure out why I couldn't see, and I was trying to assess, why I was in so much pain and what was broken, what wasn't. But in the cloud, I wasn't really thinking about anything, I was just, yeah, it was just sad. I remember reaching up to like turn on my GoPro to like record the final moments. And I actually had been recording the whole time, so I heard it like turn off. And so I think I tried to turn it back on, but my fingers were entirely numb. I didn't actually hear the beeps that it came on again, but it was so noisy in the storm. So it'd be really interesting to see that footage. Unfortunately, my GoPro smashed on the way down, and then probably had water damage from the storm, and also the river I had to kind of climb through to get out. And so the card's damaged. I'm kind of mailing it off in the next couple of days here to try and get some professional to fix it.
How did it get smashed? The camera, was that on the walk out or when you landed in the trees? I
think the trees, yeah. I got very lucky. It's 2 inches above my face, and it was smashed off my helmet, and the screen was shattered, and the little side latch was broken open, and my face was fine. My helmet was otherwise fine. I think
Do you know the damage done in air versus ground? Do you know what? Because as I understand it, you were out until you woke up in the trees, right? You passed out at somewhere 22,000, and then you didn't wake up until you were on the ground.
That's right. So I saw 22,000, and then I passed out a little while later. So I probably passed out right at the top of my climb. I only went to 24,300 or something. Yeah, and so I was basically just out there, and I don't think it was from hypoxia. I think it was just from these negative G's, right? All the blood rushing to your brain.
Yeah.
And I was out on the whole descent, and looking at the track log, it was basically just fell out of the sky. It was straight down at 15, 18 meters per second, right to the trees. I don't
Yeah,
know why.
what are your thoughts there? Were you in the down flush from the like a microburst type of thing? Or your wing was just a rope.
Yeah, I'm sure it was massive sink. The wing was soaking wet and maybe full of ice.
Oh,
I have no
yeah.
idea. It could have been collapsed or partially collapsed. It could have been in a spiral, I guess. Um, I'm
God,
not
it's probably a
sure.
good thing you were unconscious.
Yeah, I mean, I
Well,
would have
maybe
thrown
not.
my
Maybe you would have
reserve, I
thrown your
suppose.
reserve, and that would have been better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but then I would have like landed further out, and even if I had landed probably 500 meters out, I wouldn't have been able to make it to a hill to call for help. I was just so lucky the way it all worked out, and I hit these trees going at 18 meters per second, and had a relatively, I think, soft landing, all things considered, and I mean, I
Did you
did
hit the ground?
break my neck. I'm not sure. I was
Oh,
about a meter off the ground when I came to,
good God.
just
So
sitting there in
lucky.
my harness in this hailstorm, and yeah. So I had this like access to my quick pack bag, so I just covered myself, and my hands were just totally useless. So I just kind of blew on my hands for like half an hour, trying to warm them up under my little tarp.
Okay, what were the go through the list of injuries?
Sure, yeah. So when I came to, I was just shocked I was alive still. I was kind of, it took me a little while to come to. My left eye was essentially blind. I couldn't see a thing, couldn't see my hand in front of my face. And I thought that was from a corneal injury, but the corneal injury actually healed up over a few days, and I still couldn't see very well. So it was actually just from a vitreous hemorrhage, so blood in the back chamber of the eye.
Hmm.
And then my right eye, I couldn't see this large chunk, this well-defined, large blob in the central vision. So it's a retinal hemorrhage, but otherwise I could see around the outside, and that was clear still. So I was lucky to have that kind of part of my vision clear. That probably saved me. I had bitten into my tongue really deep, and that actually ended up being a really kind of annoying injury. I think I used my tongue as a mouth guard. Like I basically bit
Mm.
right through. I think I chipped my teeth in my tongue.
Oh
Um,
God.
yeah, and
Ooh.
what else is going on? Yeah, so I separated my acromioclavicular joint, my AC joint. I definitely have a couple broken ribs on the right side. I ended up with an unstable C4, C5 neck fracture. I didn't know that at the time. I thought my spine was relatively good, and it was just kind of all muscular, pain that I was experiencing. Yeah, what else? I think that's and my hands just frozen and just not useful at all. And then they actually ended up being they're still burning and painful and numb even now, 2 weeks later, right? So
Well, I bet you won't get some of that back for months.
yeah, it'll be a while, I think. But I mean, every day is a little better, hopefully. And
Yeah.
my vision's
But no
almost
frostbite.
no frostbite. It was a moist freezing injury, so not a like
Oh.
a dry freezing. So
And no frostbite on your face.
nope, nothing there. Maybe
Oh.
my left cornea might have had frostbite damage, but I had some antibiotic drops, and I just used kind of to recover, and within 3 days, the corneal injury, whatever it was kind of resolved.
Any of these injuries, I guess, especially to your eye, long-term consequence? I mean, the fractures in your neck will be fine, right?
Yeah, yeah. I just hard collar for a couple of months, and that should be hopefully totally fine. The retina. I went and saw an ophthalmologist in Vancouver, a few days ago, and I actually am going to see an optometrist tomorrow just for a follow up. When I saw the ophthalmologist, my right eye was too full of blood for them to see the retina. It's kind of thinned out a little bit now, so hopefully we'll get some pictures at the back. But I have all these retinal hemorrhages on the left side, and I guess there's a risk of like the retina tearing, and the retina doesn't heal very well if it tears. But I think my left eye seems great now, so I'm kind of hopeful that there's no permanent eye damage at all. And the right eye is still clearing. It's kind of interesting. So that right eye had that central blob of vision loss, so that retinal hemorrhage, which is like a blood blister on your retina. And I'm really lucky that it didn't burst and create a vitreous hemorrhage, like leak into the back chamber of the eye. Otherwise, I would have been blind on waking up there. But a few days later, like when I was feeling a little better, like I think on day 4, I was just kind of repacking my reserve actually, and I just saw this like well-defined blob just kind of spring a little leak. So this tiny little wisp of blood just kind of started coming from it, and I just watched it like drain itself, into the back chamber of my eye over the next
Oh,
like couple hours. And I was meeting a friend for a mango shake at our local LZ, cafe, and just by the second mango shake, I was blind basically. So it went from being that my good eye, except for this like central chunk of like this red, well defined blob, to totally blind in that eye, like within an hour or two.
whoa.
Yeah.
Spooky, man. The spooky doesn't stop even when you're in the thundercloud. As you think it wouldn't get any scarier than that, but it
Yeah,
certainly
but
did.
luckily my left eye had sort of the blood had been resorbed slowly, and so my left eye was at least somewhat usable by the time this happened, and so I wasn't entirely blind at that point, but my vision definitely took a nosedive on day 4 there of healing.
I wonder if you would have come to still in flight if the sync wasn't so dramatic. It
Yeah,
was
I'm
that the
not sure.
negative G's that put you out, or just lack of oxygen? I
I
guess
think it
that's
was G.
kind of
Like
hand
I
in
don't
hand,
know
huh?
if I'm not a pro on high altitude medicine or whatever, but I think it was most likely the G's. It didn't seem, especially if you're just sitting there in a harness, like 24,000 feet doesn't seem overly high. I was only up there fairly briefly.
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah, I would think it would be the G's.
Were you flying with those
Was I flying with what? Sorry.
oxygen?
Oh no, I've never flown with
Yeah,
oxygen.
yeah. Okay. Uh, had you gone over the back much on this trip, or were you just flying the front range?
Just the front range. Yeah, we were the three of us, that came to beer together. We're all kind of hesitant to fly the back. I didn't have the proper kind of GPS equipment and I spot device or in reach. I didn't have that all set up, and so I was leery to go anywhere where I couldn't self extract.
Okay, so you didn't have an inReach.
No, I didn't. I definitely would
Okay.
next time.
Yeah.
The problem is they kept stealing the inReaches, like the Indian, or the airlines or whoever kept
Right.
everyone's
I've heard
was
about all
posting
this
that their Varios and satellite devices were being taken at customs or.
Well, I think the main message that needs to get out to people going there, that it's such an incredible place to fly, and it's so kind of accessible that I think people lose track of the fact that you really are in a self-rescue situation there. You can't call, helicopters want to be paid in advance. Things like insurance take time. I think that people are not flying there with nearly enough margin. You have to take it, and that's easy to do when you're on launch with 300 people. There's a feeling of safety there that really doesn't exist. It's a place that rescue is tough. It's time consuming. It relies on the community more than the search and rescue or the helicopters. I mean, they have them there, but every time I've been involved there remotely, that none of this happened when I was there, thankfully, but when I've been involved in rescues there remotely, because I'm the one that gets the call when people have global rescue and this kind of thing, and it's just it's not straightforward. You're not in the Alps.
Yeah, just a couple of weeks ago, somebody waited for 3 days for a helicopter that with a broken back, and they were just
Yeah.
in a super accessible, the golf course, just like clearing a couple of ridges over from launch, and the helicopter just, I guess, had to work things out with the insurance company, and it took them, over 48 hours
Exactly.
to figure this
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, and I think that's just and then there's the inReach thing, that they don't want you using them and satellite trackers and that kind of. I mean, I think you have to pile all this on before you step off the hill and really understand. And I'm not telling you, I'm just saying in general, for the general knowledge is I think it seems like the approach is too lax in beer. I mean, it's big stuff, and again, like that false sense of security of flying that front range. You're proof positive that it's still big, it's still the Himalayas.
Yeah, I would definitely go back with proper, satellite equipment. Like I didn't really know enough about it, to be honest, or anything, honestly. Like this whole mesh-tastic devices. There's all sorts of sort of newer messaging options, and I have very limited knowledge and all that stuff. But I would definitely gear up before I went back to fly there for sure.
You said you have a 1 and a 3-year-old. What's the future? Can you predict? How do you think you're going to feel in the air? How's Mama feel about Ben going flying?
Yeah, I mean, we had some heated discussions a week or so ago, but I mean, she'll be okay. I still want to fly. I'm not scared off flying. Yeah, I'll certainly, I've definitely learned a hard lesson, and I'll definitely be far more cautious around clouds and even just considering storms and cloudsuck. I wasn't, yeah, for some reason I wasn't even thinking that might even happen on my way back from Dharamsala. Like, I don't, yeah, just inexperience. So yeah, definitely learned a few things for sure. But no, I plan to. I'll probably go back to beer and do some more flying. And I mean, it's kind of a lovely place. The town's lovely. It's a nice place to have dinner and hang out. And flying's incredible if you can stay safe.
I understand, so you land in the tree, you're a meter off the ground, you can't see, you're totally frozen. Take us from there, because I understand there was quite a bit of luck involved with that whole side of things too.
Yeah, even just where I landed, like I was within accessible range basically of like getting up to a hill where I could contact friends. Like I wasn't sort of way deep in the jungle. I again, just being a meter above the ground, I was able to get out of my harness. I mean, it definitely took some effort and some time with frozen fingers and just pain everywhere. Yeah, and then just I guess I packed stuff up, and I wasn't really. I think I kind of made a poor decision then as well. I should have stayed high and then tried to kind of stay on the high train and then loop around to where I was going to go. But I followed this like cascading river, jungle river valley down, thinking I would come across a bridge or houses or a road, and just didn't seem like it was happening. And it was like one little waterfall after the next, and I obviously could barely see, so I was just sliding down these big boulders into streams, and yeah, I was just soaking wet, and it was sketchy.
Is it dark now? Is it nighttime?
No, it was like I wouldn't be able to see anything in the dark, and so there was just like this pressure for me to get somewhere before dark because I would just be totally useless. And I kind of figured I might freeze to death. Like I had a thermometer and it's saying 5 or 6 degrees in the hailstorm, like in the jungle, so it wasn't warm, and I was yeah, but
you left your wing, but you took your harness. What do you got with you?
yeah, I put everything in my bag. I took my harness. That's pretty much it. Luckily, my iPhone survived this whole thing because that showed me where I was and where I needed to go. And so that was, there's a lot of things that fell into place for me to be able to get out. I didn't have any limb fractures. I think a broken foot would have wrecked me for sure. Yeah, so I slid or crawled my way down this river valley, and then I finally found an access point where I could kind of climb up the ravine side, and it took a lot of effort. And
people know you're in there at this point.
No, they hadn't heard from me, so they were getting too worried because my friend was actually caught in the storm and he got rained on, had to go land, and 2 other gliders that were with them threw their reserves because they went parachutal. So there was definitely carnage going on, and they hadn't heard from me all day, and so they were definitely worried something had happened. And so then I managed to get up onto this bluff and had cell reception, and then just texted them. I just said, "Hey guys, I'm in trouble." Yeah, and then their first text back was like, "Where are you? We'll come get you."
And And you're kind of between. It looked like you were kind of between Dharamsala and Beer, right? You're on that front range.
Yeah. I kind of flew back maybe a third of the way. I think I was down below Hobbiton, the ridge Hobbiton. Yeah. And I wasn't too far from civilization. So I sat there. I put my quick, pack tarp over me again, just sitting there in the dark. It got dark now, and then I just couldn't walk anywhere. I couldn't see well enough. And I got my headlamp out. I have I carry a headlamp just for these situations, and the battery was dead, so I don't know if it turned on at some point. But that basically, I was planning to walk in the dark, but I couldn't do that without a headlamp. So I just sat there, and then somebody had organized a local family to come find me, and then 2 guys came with flashlights and basically held my hand and walked me back down to their house, which took about 20 minutes, and then they the mother of the family sat me down and rubbed hot water and oil on my arms and legs and just tried to warm them up.
Wow.
And it was so lovely. I had all these like spines and splinters from all these plants, and she like plucked them all out of my hands and arms. And yeah, it was great.
At this point, had you communicated with family, with home? Did they know what was going on?
I sent my wife Lindsay, a text. I didn't elaborate. I was just like, I just said, I think I'm down. I landed far out. I'm, waiting for a ride back. I didn't want to kind of get into a conversation at that point. And with the time change, it was like probably 6 a.m. for her and stuff. And she was in Halifax at a conference. And yeah, so I downplayed it for a day or two.
Have you ever been this close to sayonara before?
This was, I probably the closest. I think once in Belize, I was climbed up a waterfall, and there was this like top pool, and it was like this, I don't know, probably 50, 60-foot waterfall onto rocks. And there was just really slippery rock bowl. And I remember kind of just sort of getting close to it, and I slipped. I like slid into this like top pool that was like pouring over this edge, and I just like got dragged towards this certain death. Ooh. Basically. And I remember just barely arresting myself, and then like, it's a slimy, slippery rock, and just like, scraping my way back to safety there. And yeah, so that was obviously very close as well, but no, it's probably tops.
But quicker and not so prolonged. This was a long period of, I'm sure in real time it wasn't that long, but still you had some time to think about this one.
Yeah, it just feels like a bad dream to me now. The effort and agony that like it took me a couple hours to get from my harness to where I could contact friends, and it was just nothing but pain and just a lot of effort. I had to keep telling myself, I'm not going to survive that storm and then sort of die in the jungle. That's just not an option. I just got to keep going.
Right. Yeah, I'm not giving up now.
Yeah.
What was that feeling of resignation like? Do you remember it very clearly?
I do. Yeah. Like up in the cloud, like I said, there wasn't panic. It was just this, resignation. Exactly. I just felt like I'd made some very, very poor choices, and I just really let my family down. And yeah, I just felt very bad that everyone was going to have to go through all this, sorrow and heartache, and it's all my fault, and all for nothing. Yeah.
I don't know that this is a very good question, because I think I think that we can all envision, where things went wrong and how you would do things differently. But were there any, anything you're writing down at this stage or contemplating that, wow, what would you do differently that wasn't obvious? I guess maybe that's the question.
Yeah, good question. Just flying into the valley earlier, like at the first sign of, kind of somewhat unreasonable cloudsuck, just get out of it. Be much more aggressive at trying to stay below the clouds, for sure. I just kind of let it happen. I had my GPS track. I felt fairly safe kind of flying along in the same direction and slowly going up and
just
up.
Just not recognizing the potential, really.
That's right, yeah. I just didn't know. And I was I was leery to fly off into the valley because I didn't know that area as well. And I, for some reason, felt safe near my old GPS tracks. Yeah, it was silly for sure. But yeah, definitely turning away from the mountains earlier. Just like landing out, finding a spot to land if it's clearly unsafe weather conditions, or trying to fly around the storm. That would have been, definitely the one change I would have made.
Has there been any interesting, social media can be a vicious place these days. Has there been any, I just found you yesterday on Facebook because I wasn't, we hadn't connected before. I understand you haven't, you weren't a listener of the podcast. So this was a name that popped up that I wasn't familiar with. So I had to kind of hunt you down, but so I haven't seen any of that stuff because I don't pay any attention to any of it. But has there been any weird blowback, or I don't know, God, dude, that was so stupid, or everybody just thankful that you shared it?
Yeah, it's actually been remarkably supportive. Everyone's just sort of, get well soon and thanks for sharing. And I think there was the odd comment on Facebook, oh, that's what you get for flying in clouds. And that's true. No defense
Yeah,
against that.
right. Yeah, got to own
Um,
that one, I guess.
yeah. And, yeah, no, I honestly, it's been a generally positive experience. I mean, I haven't been searching on social media. Really, it's just that X contest and people's comments. And yeah, it was sort of nice to read. It took me a few days to post this thing, and then a few days to discover private messages, and
Hmm.
and then to reply to some people and stuff. But yeah, no, I actually felt quite good just to get some support from random strangers, and yeah, overall, it's a positive thing.
I'm still curious that it's pretty obvious that you'll keep flying. Was there ever any self doubt about that? Obviously, you're probably your wife and the kids are probably too young. They're just rad. They're just psyched you're back. I probably don't really piece it together that much, but um, yeah, talk more about just the desire to keep going after something like this.
Yeah, I think it sort of depended on my injuries. If I had lost, I was kind of worried about my left eye. After my corneal injury had healed up, I still had this like poor vision. So I was messaging with an ophthalmology friend of mine, you know, uh, and I was worried I was going to have some permanent vision loss. What was going on? I wasn't quite sure, and so that would have wrecked my flying. Obviously, you can't really fly with poor vision. So, um, yeah, and I was. I mean, other than that, I knew I was going to fly again. Like that,
Hmm.
paragliding's been a really fun thing. I've really enjoyed it the last few years, and I definitely would want to continue that. Obviously, I could, yeah, push a little less and just take it easy. Maybe just enjoy, floating around a little more and stop trying to go for personal bests. And yeah, just
Good luck.
yeah,
That's a hard one.
yeah.
uh, I'm curious about, you flew 2009 to 2019, about a decade, and it doesn't sound, you were kind of doing a couple flights a year. Sounds like you didn't really grab you, and then suddenly it does. What was the switch there?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, I bought this old Buzz One. Like, we split it with a friend, and I bought this glider and harness and reserve, and we basically took turns flying initially. Um, yeah, I think I just wasn't. There was just other stuff going on at that time in my life. I was super busy, medical stuff, residency, and I don't think I was in the right spot just to get enough airtime and just to certainly do it safely. Yeah, and so upgrading my wing and gear and getting a proper harness and all that, and then planning some trips to Mexico and Colombia and kind of getting some real airtime, like some longer flights and not just sled runs, and some proper thermaling. And buying a Vario helped too. I didn't have a Vario until I don't know 2021 or something. Like it's yeah, and so yeah. Yeah, it's basically just scratching the surface, up until then. It certainly wasn't safe or proper. I ended up doing did some courses in Nepal, New Zealand, and yeah, that was certainly very helpful.
How would you classify your approach to flying before this incident? What I mean by that is, do you think the outside world looking in would classify your approach as risky, as normal, as safe? As if they could put a word on it, what would it be?
Well, I was contacted by a friend who I flew with in Colombia quite a bit, and he was just, wishing me to get better sooner. And he's like, "Oh, I, thought you were a pretty conservative pilot, and
Hmm.
so, I'm sure this was out of your control." But I think my friends in beer, I was definitely more aggressive than them in terms of trying to push boundaries and distances. And
Hmm. Yeah,
yeah,
it's a
I
good
think,
place for that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But I mean, I have a super good pilot who's far more conservative. He's the guy who researched beer, and he just researches paragliding, everything, and he's very very knowledgeable, and he's very very conservative. And he says himself, he's like, Ben, somewhere between me and you is the perfect paraglider. And it's true. I think I'm.
Yeah, well said. You do. I mean, yeah, you want some push, or you never get very good. But I think when you're out there long enough, you see enough things like this, and like you said, hopefully you make cheap mistakes. This wasn't totally cheap, but it could have been
Oh,
worse.
it's relatively cheap. Yeah, even like
Yeah.
I have this numbness and burning in my hands still, but it's. I mean, it's nothing. I'm just so lucky, and I have a broken neck, but that's honestly it's not a big deal.
If you're a paraglider, everybody has one of those.
Yeah.
Sorry. Ben, I know it's hard to probably revisit the trauma, and I'm sure you've done it dozens and dozens and dozens of times, but thanks for sharing your story. It's a great one. Wow, I kind of have shivers. I'm glad you're all right, bud.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot for having me. It's been nice chatting with you. Yeah, thank you.
If you find the Cloud-Based Mayhem valuable, you can support it in a lot of different ways. You can give us a rating on iTunes or Stitcher, or however you get your podcast. That goes a long ways and helps spread the word. You can blog about it on your own website or share it on social media. You can talk about it on the way up to launch with your pilot friends. I know a lot of interesting conversations have happened that way. And of course, you can support us financially. This show does take a lot of time, a lot of editing, a lot of storage and music and all kinds of behind-the-scenes cost. So if you can support us financially, all we've ever asked for is $1 a show. And you can do that through a one-time donation through PayPal, or you can set up a subscription service that charges you for each show that comes out. We put a new show out every 2 weeks. So, for example, if you did $1 a show and every 2 weeks, it'd be about $25 a year. So way cheaper than a magazine subscription, and it makes all of this possible. I do not want to fund this show with advertising or sponsors. We get asked about that pretty frequently, but for a whole bunch of different reasons, which I've said many times on the show, I don't want to do that. I don't like having that stuff at the front of the show. And I also want you to know that these are authentic conversations with real people, and these are just our opinions, but our opinions are not being skewed by sponsors or advertising dollars. I think that's a pretty toxic business model. So I hope you dig that. You can support us. If you go to cloudbasedmayhem.com, you can find the places to support. You can do it through patreon.com/cloudbasedmayhem. If you want a recurring subscription, you can also do that directly through the website. We've tried to make it really easy, and that will give you access to all the bonus material, little video casts that we do, and extra little nuggets that we find in conversations that don't make it into the main show, but we feel like you should hear. We don't put any of that behind a paywall. If you can't afford to support us, then just let me know and I'll set you up with an account. Of course, that'll be lifetime, and hopefully you're being in a position someday to be able to support us. But you'll find all that on the website. All of you who have supported us or even joined our newsletter or bought Cloud-Based Mayhem merchandise, t-shirts or hats or anything, you should be all set up. You should have an account, and you should be able to access all that bonus material now. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate your support, and we'll see you on the next show. Thank you.